Masechet Yevamot, Daf Yod Dalid. We began the discussion of lo titkodedu, very important halacha about not creating factions. And so we had already a discussion between Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan seems to limit the application, and Resh Lakish expands it. And we ended off asking from our very Mishnah, which says that Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel have very different views about whether one Yavam is allowed to marry the co-wife of his Irva, and that has significant repercussions, even mamzerut. So how could they have different opinions about this? Isn't this a problem of lotit kodedu? And so now we wondered, well, did Bet Shammai actually practice their opinion? Resh Lakish says they did not. And that would explain why there's no problem of lotit kodedu here, because even Bet Shammai, they all practiced like Bet Hillel. And so Resh Lakish therefore can have a more expansive application in general. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, Asu ve'asu, Bet Shammai did their own opinion, and Bet Hillel practiced their own opinion. And so therefore it has, in order to, it has to be allowed in some way. So it must be the lotit kodedu is more limited in its application. Somebody shouldn't even think that Rabbi Yochanan does not hold of lotit kodedu at all. I think it's more likely that he simply limits it in some way, although the Talmud leaves off Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan here, and now switches over to from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. And now we are going to have a parallel discussion. Ubeplukta derav ushmuel derav omer lo asu bet Shammai kedivrehem. Ushmuel amar asu ve'asu. Rav says Bet Shammai did not follow their own opinion. They were saying it theoretically. We think this is the correct one. But, we're going to, for the sake of unity, we'll follow Bet Hillel. And Shemuel says, no, each side actually practiced their own opinion. Now, Emat, when are we talking about that Shemuel, you say each one practiced their own opinion, or both of them, Rav and Shemuel? If this was before the bat call, in Eruvin, Daf Yud Gimel mentions the famous bat call that says, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim, both Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai don't think that any of them are false prophets. That divrei Elohim chayim is a quote from Yirmiyah, who calls the false prophets people who are perverse, the divrei Elohim chayim there. So this is no, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, both of them have truth, are part of the authentic tradition. Nevertheless, we have to follow this one thing. So halacha ke Bet Hillel. So if it's before that bat call was pronounced, then the one who says they did not practice it have, and Resh Lakish before, what would be the reason that Bet Shammai did not practice their own opinion? The bat call didn't say everyone has to follow Bet Hillel, so it makes sense that before the bat call, Bet Shammai practiced their own opinion. But if it was after the bat call was already pronounced, then it doesn't make sense. Those who said that, yes, they in fact practiced their own opinion, as Rabbi Yochanan and Shemuel. Well, there's a bat call already said that halachas ke Bet Hillel. So doesn't everybody have to follow the bat call? Okay, good question, and we're going to answer both ways. I can give you an answer whether it's before or after that they are arguing. I mean, literally, these are early Amoraim, so they would be arguing presumably after that historical bat call, if that bat call we place back in Yavne. So it's interesting that we don't answer chronologically about when that story was told and when these Amoraim say their opinion, but maybe because their opinion is simply reflecting historical analysis of theirs. Okay, so anyway, when did they follow or not follow their own opinion? Maybe it could be that they are referring to before the bat call. Could go on to Bet Hillel Ruba. And Bet Hillel was the majority even before the bat call. They sat around in a Sanhedrin and they voted. Bet Hillel is the majority. Mandamar lo asu. According to those who say Bet Shammai did not practice their own opinion, that's because Bet Hillel was the majority. And in fact, the bat call didn't even change much because they were already following the majority of Bet Hillel. And so the one who says they did is that says something extraordinary, that we only follow the majority in a case when they are similar in their stature and knowledge. But in this case, they could argue that Bet Shammai was sharper. And so even though Bet Hillel had the majority, Bet Shammai said, I know you have the majority, but our argument is better, sharper, more learned, more insightful, and therefore we follow the minority opinion. This is an extraordinary statement because it undoes all of majority rule, right? Can you imagine, the Supreme Court, the minority loses, there's only, 3 votes there, and they say, yeah, but we're sharper. We have a better argument, so we're going to follow the minority anyway. Okay, but that's amazing that the Bavli to even bring up that possibility that Bet Shammai is sharper than Bet Hillel. Okay, but in any case, it could be that before the bat kol, either way, so after the bat kol says halacha is like Bet Hillel, so if the Bet Shammai then after the bat kol, they heard that, bat kol said that law follows Bet Hillel. Okay, now they changed their mind and they all follow. So it makes sense if they did not practice their own opinion. But those who said that Bet Shammai did practice their own opinion, even after the bat kol, could say Rabbi Yoshua hidamad en mashkichim the bat kol. They could follow the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua after in the famous Oven Abachnai story. Where both in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi versions of the story, the bat kol comes out and says, "Halacha kedibre Rabbi Eliezer," and Rabbi Yoshua then says, "Sorry, lo b'shamayim we don't have to listen to a bat kol, right? We vote, and therefore this divine echo, this divine voice, has no legal authority to determine the law, and so even after the bat kol, nothing changed. Bet Shammai continued to practice their own opinion." Okay, good. So now that we resolved how they could possibly have done that in terms of the laws of majority rule and bat kol, manda mar asu karenan kan lo titkodedu. Now we're going to go back to the question that we started with, which is that according to those opinions that said they practiced their opinion, which was Rabbi Yochanan and Shemuel, but isn't this a problem of you're making factions now? It could have long-lasting effects. It could turn into sectarianism. This is lo tasu agodot agodot. That's what it means. Amar Abaye ki amrina lo titkodedu kigon shete bate dinim be'ir achat halalu morim kedibre Bet Shammai v'halal morim kedibre Bet Hillel. Aval shete bate dinim b'shnei ayarot le'etlan ba. So Abaye limits the law of lo titkodedu and says it only applies to 2 courts within one city. You have, a large city, and there's 2 different courts that gather, and one says Bet Shammai is right, the other one teaches that Bet Hillel is right. So you're a citizen in the city, you're going to be very confused about what to do, and then half the residents are going to do one thing, and half the residents do the other thing, and they all live near each other, so this creates a tremendous amount of dissonance, fighting, people saying, it looks like there's 2 Torahs. But if the 2 Batei Dinim are in separate cities, that is not a problem because they're in different cities. People traveled a lot less back then than people do today. And there's no instant communication and seeing what people are doing on Instagram. So really, you live in that city, you're there most of the time, and therefore you see one practice and the other one is not going to affect you. So it will not seem like there's 2 Torahs. People are not going to fight because they're in separate cities, and therefore that's okay. So presumably this answers the question. I guess Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, each city would have to follow one or the other and not mix it up within the city. Amar le Rava v'ha Bet Shammai u'Bet Hillel kishtei batei dinim b'irachat tameh. Rava says, no, that doesn't make sense because Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, there was not a Bet Shammai city and a Bet Hillel city. There were residents of everyone living in Tiberia and Yerushalayim and wherever. So they weren't separated geographically. Ela amar Rava ki amrina lo titkodedu kigon bet din be'ir achat. Pelag morin kedivrei Bet Shammai, pelag morin kedivrei Bet Hillel. Aval shete batei dinim b'irachat le'etlan ba. So Rava limits the law of lo titkodedu even further, and he says it's only if you have when we only apply lo titkodedu when you have a bet din in one city, and within that bet din, half of the judges are following Bet Shammai, and half are teaching that you should follow Bet Hillel. that is complete anarchy, right? Can you imagine one bet din? And half the people are going to do one thing and half do the other, right? Can you have a legislature that they vote and then they don't listen to each other? They go ahead and practice different laws after that, right? So that's not a bet din at all. And that would be a huge problem of lotit kodedu. It would just break the whole majority rule or the concept of a bet din. But if it's two betei dinim, even if they're in one city, then that's okay. This bet din, they have the authority to decide what they think, and the other bet din what they think, and each one is following their methodology and system, and that's okay. There's not a problem of lotit kodedu. So you see, Rava severely limits lotit kodedu to be right. Almost it still does apply in the case of one bet din, but that's basically just supporting majority rule. So he limits it greatly, so that is not a problem of Bet Shammai. And yeah, even in the same city, you could have everybody going ahead and running around and doing different practices without violating lotit kodedu. All right, so now that we have these two interpretations and limitations of lotit kodedu, I think what you see is that the Bavli, these two Bavli Amoraim limit it greatly and therefore allow for a lot more pluralism than in the Yerushalmi. I wrote in a book chapter about this, and I'm happy to share if anyone just wants to email me, and I'll send you the PDF. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and ask about lotit kodedu from several more cases where there were differences of practice. Tashema bimkomo shel Rabbi Eliezer hayu koretim asim lasot pechamim b'Shabbat lasot barzel. Rabbi Eliezer he felt that if you're allowed to if you have a halacha that you can do to override Shabbat, like Brit Milah overrides Shabbat. Everyone agrees with that, and everyone agrees that it has to be on the 8th day, so you can actually make the cut of the Brit Milah on Shabbat, even though that's a melacha of making a chabura. But what about the preparations? So most rabbis said any preparations that you could do before Shabbat, you must do before Shabbat. You can't do that on Shabbat. But Rabbi Eliezer says, no, if the Torah says you can do Brit Milah on Shabbat, then that assumes all the preparations too. You can even go ahead and cut a tree down and burn it to make coals, to make a knife, so that you can use the knife for Brit Milah, right? If you're legislating or something is permitted, then you have to provide for all the everything that goes together with it, right? Like if the federal government says a mandate and you have to educate your kids and do this, then the federal government has to pay for it. They have to allow for the whole the whole system that goes along with it. That's Rabbi Eliezer's view, and he practiced it. Right, in his place, it says in his place, they would actually do this. This is the famous place of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili up in the Galilee, and they would eat poultry and dairy together, right? He would have a chicken cheeseburger, and he ate them, right, cooked and eaten together, which is quite amazing because no one else does that. But he felt that only animal meat is prohibited, which makes sense. It would make sense that an animal that produces milk, its milk should be prohibited because it's very cruel to cook it in its own mother's milk. But poultry do not produce milk. They are not mammals, and so the halacha should not apply to it. So other rabbis will say maybe it's only the Rabbanan, but they would not do it. Rabbi Yosef permitted it totally, and he actually practiced it in his city. Good. So we can infer from this, says that in his place, that only in his place did they cut down trees to make knives, but in other places they wouldn't do that. Rabbi Akiva disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer and said any work that you can do before Shabbat, and you can easily sharpen a knife, produce a knife before Shabbat and bring it to the place. Also have to do with carrying. Rabbi Akiva said you have to. That's what halacha is today. You have Brit Milah on Shabbat. The Mohel has to bring all of his tools before Shabbat. You can't carry on Shabbat. And so Rabbi Akiva says you do not override Shabbat for all these things. And so this is a question: how could we allow different practices in these two cities? Isn't that a problem of lotit kodedu? And we answer, mati yuvte mekomot shane. Well, it's not a problem. Different places, they're in different places. And so everyone agreed, right? Abaye and Rava before agreed that if it's in different places, then there's no problem of lotit kodedu. Okay, this answer is so simple that we're asking, what were you thinking? You're even asking that in the first place. Obviously, this is no problem of different places. I would have thought that because Shabbat is so stringent, that it's as if it's one place. In other words, if whatever you think the problem is, if it's because of infighting, or it seems like the Torah is two Torahs, if it's some more minor law, like working, doing melacha before Pesach or something like that, and so it's not so noticeable. But something like Shabbat violation, even if it's done in one place, like people will hear about it. Did you hear about the Brit Milah in another city? They went and cut down a tree and made a knife and all that, right? The severity would be so impactful that it will cause factionalism, even in two different cities, we might have thought. And so that's what we were asking. And Kamash Malan, no, if it's in two cities, even such a matter that's as severe as Shabbat is permitted and not a problem of lotit kodedu to have differences. Okay, so next challenge. Tashemad Rabbi Abhu ki ikla latred Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi hava meteltel sharga ki ikla latred Rabbi Yochanan la hava meteltel sharga. So Rabbi Abhu, he used to sometimes go and visit one of his teachers, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and when he went to his house and stayed over there for Shabbat, he would move the candlestick or the lamp. This is an issue of mukseh. If you light, as we do, we light a lamp before Shabbat, Shabbat candles. While it's lit, for sure, one cannot move it. The question is, after it goes out, do you consider it mukseh and you can't move it or not? Incidentally, halacha l'maaseh on this, Rabbi Chacham Ovadia Yosef is posek that if you have in mind when you're lighting the Shabbat candles to say when it goes out, I want to be able to move it, right? I'm not making it mukseh because I don't want to leave it out there. I want to use the space and I want to put it away. And then, at least for Sefaradim, it's permitted, and you don't have to make the Tanai every week. You could make it once a year. And it says, whenever I light candles, the whole year, I'm going to have in mind that I'm going to want to move it, and then one can move it. Okay, anyway, so Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was lenient in this regard. So Rabbi Abu, when he went to his place, he would move the candles to the lamp. But when Rabbi Abu went to visit Rabbi Yochanan on Shabbat, Rabbi Yochanan was stringent in this halacha, so Rabbi Abu followed the stringency of his place. So now we're wondering about this. Wow, how could you have two different practices and by two different rabbis in two places? Isn't that the problem of lotit kodedu? And we answered the same thing. Oh, didn't we already say different places is permitted? Abaye and Rava would agree, so there's no problem. Oh, so no, then we reinterpret. This is what I meant to ask. Rabbi Abhu hechi avid hacha hachi v'hechi avid hacha hachi. How could Rabbi Abahu, one single sage, do both practices? I understand as one city they follow this, one city follow that. But the very same rabbi, he's going to different places on different weeks. Sometimes he's saying it's allowed, and sometimes he's practicing not allowed. That seems like self-contradictory and confusing. Isn't that a problem of lotit kodedu? The answer is Rabbi Abhu could be Yoshua ben Levi Sabir Aleh. Really, Rabbi Abhu himself agreed with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and permitted it. But when he went to Rabbi Yochanan's house, so he didn't move it out of honor for his host, for Rabbi Yochanan. You don't want to insult him. You go to someone's house and you bring something that that person wouldn't eat or wouldn't think is kosher. So it's out of respect. So that's why, that explains Rabbi Abhu's behavior, right? The question is, what if it was the other way around? What if Rabbi Abhu really was stringent and agreed with Rabbi Yochanan, and then when he went to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's house, would he then be lenient and even do something he thought was prohibited in order to fit in to the place where he was? Okay, the Gemara does not address that. Maybe we would say he'd be passive, and you don't violate lotit kodedu when you're just not doing something passively, right? Maybe he just doesn't Doesn't feel like moving the lamp. Okay, so anyway, that explains Rabbi Abahu's under logic. He really believed one thing, but it's okay to be machmir if you want in another place out of respect. Now we ask, but what about Rabbi Abahu's servant? Isn't he going to get confused? He's going to see him doing one thing here and one thing there, and the servant is going to be like, this rabbi is not consistent, and then he may come to make a mistake and say, oh, I guess it's allowed, so I'm going to move it again. I'm going to move it in Yohanan's place. And so the answer is, Rabbi Abahu tells his servant, listen, this is why I'm doing it, right? Really, I am consistent. I believe it's permitted, but it's okay to be stringent in order to, out of respect for one's host. Okay, good. And so now we resolved those issues. Next, Tashema. Afa pishe elu osrim ve'elu matirin lo nimneu bet Shammai milisa nashim bet Hillel lo bet Hillel mi bet Shammai. And now we're quoting the Mishnah that said that even though they disagreed regarding the co-wife, nevertheless, they did not refrain from marrying each other. Either way, they married each other. Okay, so let's analyze this and see in terms of the machloket about whether they practiced or not. According to the opinions that said Bet Shammai did not practice their own opinion, everyone followed Bet Hillel. Well, then it makes sense. That's why they did not refrain. Right? Why would they refrain? Everyone's following Bet Hillel. And so, yeah, they're all going to practice. They're all going to marry each other. They're all following the same law. So this makes sense. But if you think that they did, Bet Shammai practiced their own opinion, then they should have refrained from marrying them, right? This would be a big problem. You're going to have people that are mamzerim, according to Bet Hillel, right? Would Bet Hillel allow people who are mamzerim to marry in? On the other hand, people would be asur lekehuna, according to Bet Shammai, from the group of Bet Hillel. So would they allow them to marry in? It makes no sense that they would not refrain. They should have refrained if, in fact, they were doing different things. Okay, Bishlama Bet Shammai mi Bet Hillel lo nimneu debnei chayave lavin ninhu. Okay, although you know what, we can resolve at least half the problem that Bet Shammai did not refrain from marrying Bet Hillel, because what's the worst thing that could happen in Bet Shammai's opinion if you follow Bet Hillel? Well, the worst thing that could happen is Bet Hillel says, this woman, you don't have to do yibum or chalitza. The co-wife, she can just go marry anybody. And what would that be? Bet Shammai says, no, that person needs to do yibum or chalitza. If someone who needs to do yibum or chalitza goes ahead and marries an outsider, that is only a chayavel lavin. It's only a lav, which is not good, but nevertheless, the children are not mamzerim. And so even if someone would do that, it does not affect the next generation. And therefore, Bet Shammai could tolerate having their children marrying the children of Bet Hillel. So it could be a problem of that marriage itself, but won't be a long-lasting problem. So that is understandable. How could Bet Hillel not prevent themselves from marrying Bet Shammai? After all, according to Bet Shammai, someone would perform yibum in the case of sarat habat. They would perform yibum with the co-wife of someone who's an adva, and according to Bet Hillel, that is chayav karet, because there's no mitzvah of yibum, and therefore it's simply erva, right? One's brother's wife is erva, and the children there would be mamzerim. So how could it be that if they actually practice Bet Shammai actually practice their opinion, how could Bet Hillel not prevent their families from marrying into Bet Shammai? Good question. And maybe you'll say that according to Bet Hillel, mamzer is not produced from someone who's chayav karet. That even though it's chayav karet, if one goes ahead and takes his sister-in-law when there's no mitzvah of yibum, even if it's chayav karet, it doesn't go past to the next generation. There's no mamzerut. If you think that, but you don't think that because it's not true. מועדים שאין ממזר אלא ממי שאיסורו איסור ערווה ואנוש karet. Because I said that even though there is a machloket between the houses regarding whether you can marry do yibum with the co-wife or not, it's true there is a disagreement, but they all agree. They agree that there's no mamzer except for someone who violates an isur erva that has the punishment of karet. And so everyone agrees that if you would take a sister-in-law, not in the context of yibum, that it would be karet, and therefore there is a mamzer. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel both agree to that principle. So we can't say that as an answer. The only way to explain our Mishnah that says they did not refrain from marrying each other is to follow the opinion that says Bet Shammai did not follow their own opinion. Everyone followed the opinion of Bet Hillel. Okay, so that's a preliminary conclusion, but then we say, no, maybe not. Lo, dolam asu demod elehu uparshe. No, it could be that they did practice their own opinion. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel did practice different opinions, and they would simply inform each other regarding any problematic case. And they would say, this guy, Mr. Friedman over there was an issue of the co-wife and someone married. So you know what? Maybe don't go on a date with that one, right? The matchmakers will know the problematic families and not put them together. And that way they could get along. Okay, and you know what? That interpretation actually makes sense. The Katani was going to prove that it has to be so. Don't think that we're forcing our way into the Mishnah, because the Katani sefa kol teharot v'kol tumot shayu elu metaharim elu metamein lo nimnu osin teharot elu al gabe elu. The next part of the Mishnah says that regarding purity and impurity objects, even though they had many disagreements regarding these laws, nevertheless, they did not refrain from using pure and impure vessels, one on top of the other. They would eat together, they would prepare their korban or terumah together and didn't worry about it. And so here too, we could have the same question. And so how could they not prevent each other, right? What, you're going to eat if this is really tameh, according to your opinion, and you're putting your terumah into it, then you're violating, causing terumah to become tameh. So if we say that they informed each other, right, and said this and that pot I think is okay, but according to you, you wouldn't think it's okay. So don't use that pot, right? And they told each other. Then it makes sense why they did not refrain from eating together. Taharot Bet Shammai lebet Hillel temeot ninhu elalav demot elehu shema mina. Right? If you think that they did not inform each other, well, even then we could resolve half the situation, and we could say it makes sense that Bet Shammai would not refrain from eating together with the vessels of Bet Hillel, because that which Bet Hillel says is tameh, Bet Shammai would say is tahor. And the assumption here is that Bet Hillel is more stringent regarding Tumah and Tahara than Bet Shammai. Okay, this is interesting because generally Bet Shammai is more stringent in Tumah and Tahara. So why is this assuming the wrong way? Two possibilities. One is there are a number of sources where Bet Hillel is more stringent. So this could be talking about those sources. And most manuscripts, in fact, do say this. So maybe it's just focusing on those cases. On the other hand, there is one Genizah fragment that switches it, that switches the names, Tumot to Bet Shammai. And then that would follow the more usual pattern of Bet Shammai being the stringent one. All right. But anyway, following this, which is the majority of manuscripts, right? So then, Ella Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. So we understand one way, one way around, but the other way around, that Bet Hillel from Bet Shammai, why would they not prevent themselves from using it? Things that Bet Shammai thought were tahor, according to Bet Hillel, would be tameh, because Bet Hillel is stringent regarding those matters. So it can't be. Rather, it must be that they informed each other about each and every case, and that's how they were able to get together and marry each other and eat together and not violate any individual prohibitions. Okay, and now we're asking, you just gave the same basic argument twice, one regarding marriage laws and one regarding Tuman Tahara. But you said, oh, the marriage laws, it must be they informed each other, because after all, they must have informed each other regarding vessels. How is one any of a stronger argument than the other that you're using the vessels to prove the marriage, right? They're actually just the same thing twice. And the answer is, if it was just the marriage laws, I might have said that in that case, it's easier for them to marry each other, because if you had a case of a co-wife, it would be publicized. A wedding ceremony itself is always publicized. And so, if someone went and performed yibum or married someone who was a sarah, that the other thing should do chalitza, people would know about it, and they would say, a few years later, say, oh, remember that case? Oh, that was a sarah case. Don't go out with her. So even without informing each other, people would already know from the publicity of such cases. Not so with vessels, where you have a vessel in your home. How is anybody outside the house going to know that, oh, you happened to touch the vessel after you touched a dead mouse? Right? There's no publicity in that regard. And so that's why it's more of a proof that they must have informed each other about every single thing. A better proof is regarding vessels. If they told each other about vessels, then it makes sense that they also did so regarding marriage laws. And so that is the conclusion. Okay, so just a note, as we said when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, that this does not seem to be the peshat of the Mishnah, right? Because I say the opposite. If they informed each other and there was never a problem, or if Bet Shammai didn't practice their own opinion, then there will be no chidush for the Mishnah to say that they married each other and ate together, right? Why wouldn't they if Bet Shammai didn't practice their own opinion, or if they told each other everything, right? The whole chidush of the Mishnah is that even though they have differences of opinion, and there would be cases where I would be eating something that I think is tameh, but according to you is tahor, right? The Mishnah seems to be going out of its way to give this stronger level of pluralism, to say that what happened during the Beit HaMikdash times, when every little thing, everyone split up and started a civil war, we cannot let this go on. But rather, we have to have this amount of time. Yes, you can follow your own opinion, but if you're interacting with the other group, then, right, when you're there, follow what they do. But the Bavli is very much toning down the level of tolerance. It's not just the Bavli, the sources beforehand, Yerushalmi Tosefta also make similar arguments. Okay, nevertheless, even after this toned down version, still significant, because we see a lot of times that even a small difference will cause a rift socially, even though you could figure out a way out of it. And so it's still a high level of cooperation, that they would maintain social relationship, eat at each other's houses, marry together, and they would have the consideration enough to inform each other, as maybe just only this dish, but everything else is okay. All right, excellent. Now, Gufa, we're going to go back to one statement we mentioned. Amar Rabbi Elazar, אף על פי שנחלקו בית שמאי ובית הלל בשרות, מודים שאין ממזר אלא ממי שאיסורו איסור ערווה ואנוש כרת. Okay, so we cited this before, but this needs clarification. It says, even though Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel disagree regarding the status of a sarah, whether she requires yibum chalitza or nothing at all, but they agree that mamzer is only produced from an isur karet. Now we say, man modim, who is agreeing to whom? That you have to tell us this at all. Ilema Bet Shammai li Bet Hillel, Peshita b'nei chayave lavin kesherim ninhu. If it's Bet Shammai agree with Bet Hillel, well then that's a simple matter, because the worst that can happen according to Bet Hillel is that someone Bet Hillel would say, you're free to go marry anybody else. You don't have to do Yibum or Chalitza, and that will be a Chayave Lavin. And of course, everyone agrees that Chayave Lavin does not produce a mamzer. Actually, not everybody agrees, but at this point, we're saying everyone agrees. It's obvious that Bet Shammai would agree with Bet Hillel that even if the Sarah marries someone else, that would only be Chayav Lavin, it would not be mamzer. So this can't be talking about Bet Shammai agreeing to Bet Hillel. It must be the other way around. Ela Bet Hillel le Bet Shammai. That also wouldn't make sense. Bet Hillel is going to agree with Bet Shammai. They disagree regarding Sarot, but Bet Hillel agrees with Bet Shammai that someone who's Yisur Karet will produce a mamzer. Yeah, but this is a case of mamzerut, right? According to Bet Hillel, you have someone who is not required to do yibum, goes ahead and does yibum. Doesn't do yibum. Goes ahead. Someone doesn't have to do yibum. Goes ahead and marries his sister-in-law. That's erva. That's chayav karet. That is a mamzer. So what are you telling me that they agree with Bet Shammai, right? That's this very case that they disagree about. So it wouldn't make any sense to put these statements together if it's Bet Hillel agreeing to Bet Shammai. So no, we go back to the first one. Le'olam Bet Shammai leBet Hillel. Really, it's Bet Shammai agreeing to Bet Hillel. Ula pukem Rabbi Akiva damar yesh mamzer mechayave lavin kamash malan then mamzer mechayave lavin. And this is to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which we already encountered. And Rabbi Akiva was very stringent and says, even if it's just a chayave lavin, a lesser, not karet, it still produces a mamzer. If you followed Rabbi Akiva, then Bet Shammai would have to consider the members of Bet Hillel to be potentially mamzerim, because if this Sarah went and married someone else, although that's a Yisur Lav, their children would be mamzerim, and that would be, a major problem both ways. So what Rabbi Elazar here is informing us is that no, Bet Shammai does not agree with Rabbi Akiva, and so the worst that could happen, according to them, is that it would be Yisur Lav and not karet. And that's what it means that Bet Shammai agrees with Bet Hillel to that extent. Good. Okay, Tashema. So going back to the question of did they actually practice their opinion or not, Tashema. Afal pi shenechleku Bet Shammai uBet Hillel besarot uBa'achayot uBeget yashan uBesafek eshet ish uMegaresh et ishto velana imo bepundak בכסף ובשווה כסף, בפרוטה ובשווה פרוטה, לא נמנעו בית שמאי מלישא נשים מבית הלל, ולא בית הלל מבית שמאי. ללמדך שחיבה ורעות נוהגים זה בזה, לקיים מה שנאמר, האמת והשלום אהבו. רבי שמעון אומר, נמנעו הן מן הוודאי, ולא נמנעו מן הספק. Okay, so now we're quoting a braita that lists more things that they disagree with each other about. Regarding sarot, which is with the case that we just had, and other cases regarding sisters, regarding an outdated bill of divorce, regarding safek eshet ish, and someone who divorces his wife, but then they end up sleeping together in an inn. We're not going to get into the details of all these cases. Regarding someone who does kiddushin with money, or something that's equivalent of money, with a peruta, something that's worth a peruta. In all these cases, there are differences, and these differences, because they have to do with marriage laws, will potentially cause someone to be a mamzer according to one opinion and totally fine according to the other opinion. Okay, even though they had many different disagreements, nevertheless, Bet Shammai did not prevent themselves from marrying the woman of Bet Hillel, nor did Bet Hillel prevent themselves from marrying the woman of Bet Shammai. And this is parallel to our Mishnah, and this teaches that they had great affection and love between them, and this fulfills a pasuk in Zechariah that says, "Ha'emet v'shalom ehavu," to love truth and peace. This is famous by Uziel. That was his mantra, and so that's Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon adds or disagrees. We're going to see they did prevent themselves from absolute cases that were certain. If I know this certainly is not kosher or not permitted, then they would refrain from marrying that person. But if it was a safek, and says maybe not, we're not sure, then they will only not refrain from marrying each other in the case of doubt. Okay, so that's the braita. Now, I amat bishlama asu mishum hachi nimneu. Ele amat lo asu amai nimneu. So same question as before. If you think that they actually practiced, if they did practice, this is following. This question is on Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says they refrained from vadai. Right? Why did they refrain from certain cases? If you say that they practiced their own opinion, well, then it makes sense why they prevented from marrying each other in cases that were certain, because yes, Beth Shammai followed their own opinion. But if you say that they did not practice their own opinion and Beth Shammai all followed Beth Hillel, then why would they refrain from marrying in certain cases? When the cases where there was no doubt, right? There would be no problem. So now we're asking from the opposite direction. Okay, Betis Beda. Okay, even within the option that says they did practice their opinion, even there it would make sense only for Bet Hillel to refrain from marrying Bet Shammai, because those are that person would be chayav karet and cause a mamzer. Bet Shammai amai nimneu mi Bet Hillel. But even so, even if they did practice their opinion, why would Bet Shammai refrain from Bet Hillel? The children, it's only chayav lav, and therefore the children are not mamzerim, and so it could be tolerable. כדאמר רב נחמן בר יצחק, לא נצרכה אלא לשרה עצמה החנמה, לא נצרכה אלא לשרה עצמה. The answer is, you're right, even though they are only it's only a lav, and the children will be kesherim, and nevertheless, for the co-wife herself, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we are going to violate a lav by giving over one of our sons to this woman who is a sarah that needs to do yibum or chalitza, and now this will cause a lav. So that by itself is a good reason to prevent us from doing from marrying. Okay. Now, hold on. This still doesn't answer the question, because what's the difference between a for sure case and a case of doubt? Even a case of doubt, you're still not going to do it. Safek doraita lechumra, right? I'm not sure. There's a half possibility. This person is not marriageable or a mamzer, so you're still not going to do it, even if it's safek. So how does Rabbi Shimon say that in the case of safek they permitted each other to marry? No, so don't say that means a case of doubt, but rather stam. If you don't say anything, we will assume that everyone is permitted, unless you tell me otherwise, right? So the standard default is permitted. So that's what we mean by safek, that default is okay, because they in fact informed each other. All right, if so, that they informed each other, then what's the chidush? My kamash malan. So then you're only informing us the same thing that we already assumed from the Resha, that they informed each other in each case, and that the Resha already said that. So that shows, love and peace. And so we answer hakamash malan tekula Rabbi Shimon. What we actually learn is that the entire baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, even though it doesn't look like that. It looks like it's a Tana Kama, and Rabbi Shimon adds something. No, actually, this whole Mishnah, the whole Baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and so the beginning says they did not prevent each other, but I just wanted to let you know, if it was for sure, then they would let each other know, and that would be, that they would prevent each other from doing that. But if it was a case of, here, safek, which we interpret to mean standard case, then they would allow it to go forth, and that itself is a sign of love and camaraderie, that they found a way to resolve any potential problems and remain a unified community. And I think it is this vision that the rabbis had as a strategy of how to remain unified despite machaloket, because there's always going to be disputes on legal matters. But if we can find a way to remain unified, and agree to disagree and find a way to socialize together, eat together, marry together, then we will not have a problem of separating into sex factions. And that way, that will guarantee greater success going forward. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen v'Amen.